This is a video that goes with the webinar on 5 ways to get a work permit if you are an undocumented foreign national. It's important to note 2 things. First of all, everything that's going to be said in this video is subject to change. Things that are going on in the immigration field are changing rapidly, sometimes by the week or by the day. But this is the law as it stands now. Second, although the focus of this webinar and this video was 5 ways to get a work permit, it should be noted that a work permit is different than residency. A work permit has an expiration date. In this sample, it's in 2011. That is the last day that a person is allowed to work legally in the United States. Now, although the green card, as it is known, the identification of permanent residency, also has an expiration date. In this sample, it's 2017. That doesn't mean that the person stops being a resident on that date. If a work permit has a 10-year validity, that just means that the green card expires. But much like a marriage doesn't expire just because you lose the ring, it's the same thing with permanent residency. A person is a permanent resident until they become a citizen or until an immigration court decides that they are no longer a resident. It is better to have a green card. Green cards allow the right to travel outside the United States, the right to stay in the United States until, like I said, the person becomes a citizen or decides to abandon their residency. It's the last step before becoming a U.S. citizen, and also being a legal permanent resident gives you the right to sponsor your relatives to come to the United States, whether those are children under the age of 21 or your spouse. So although we'll be speaking about a work permit, in some cases we'll also be speaking about residency because it is a better option. The first way to get a work permit is actually such an example. It's one where what you do at the end of the process is get a green card at the end. I mention the provisional waivers, however, because again, green cards are better than work permits. So this is a process that takes about 2 years, and after a person returns from an interview abroad and they return to the United States using an immigrant visa, which is basically like a stamp on their passport, the day they arrive in the United States, they are residents, and the green card will be mailed and sent to them by the mail with no interview in the United States. During all these 5 steps, there are no interviews in the United States. There are documents that are sent to immigration, and there is a brief interview at a U.S. embassy outside the United States, but there's no hearings in court either. Now, the provisional waiver is only for those persons with a parent or spouse who's a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident. That's very important to note. It doesn't mean that it has to be a parent or spouse who files the petition, which is the first step. Even a company can file a petition with immigration. It just means the provisional waivers, also known as I-601A, by the name of the form that is used, are only available. This entire process is only available for those with a parent or spouse who's a citizen or resident. The first step is that the petition is filed with immigration. Then the next step is that the application is sent to a place called the National Visa Center, where fees must be paid. From there, a provisional waiver package is prepared, again, form I-601A. If that third step, that third application is approved, then we go to the 4th step, which is documents are submitted to the National Visa Center. And those documents include things like copies of birth certificates, copies of marriage certificates, proving these relationships. So a marriage certificate if you claim your spouse is a citizen or resident, and also, for example, a copy of the passport of the U.S. citizen spouse, or a copy of the birth certificate of the U.S. citizen spouse. Finally, our team prepares the person for an interview abroad. You go abroad for about 2 weeks while you get a medical exam taken abroad, and then you're issued that visa or that stamp in your passport, and you return to the United States. Now, I'm ask two things. The first is, how long does it take? And the second is, what is the likelihood of success? Well, how long does it take depends on who is filing the petition, which was the first step, as you saw. The fastest cases are the cases, for example, of a US citizen spouse. It'll be about 2 years from the time the family petition is filed until the time that the person goes out for their interview, and then they spend about 2 weeks outside the US. Remember, a company can also file a petition. In that case, the process can take several more years. In terms of what is the likelihood of success, it's important to understand that since all of this happens without interviews in the United States, the ability of your attorney to write is extremely important in provisional waiver cases. And in our office, writing is taken very seriously. I, for example, have a degree in journalism and another degree in literature. And that's very helpful to the clients when the government reads our cases. We've had cases where, we have a US citizen spouse with a lot of money, and other attorneys refused to take that case because they said, well, it's going to be very impossible to win this based on the fact that, the US citizen spouse doesn't really need the help of the foreign national. And we were able to demonstrate that wasn't true. That even though the US citizen spouse makes a lot of money, or the US citizen spouse is a very independent person, without any medical problems, they still need the person. They still need the foreign national here. And that's why we win those cases. Second way that we can get a work permit is cancellation. Now this is important because unlike provisional waiver, where everything takes place outside, or the only interview is outside the United States, cancellation happens inside the United States. With cancellation, there are no interviews with immigration, and there's no processing at the embassy. All of it takes place in the United States. However, cancellation is in a courtroom, an immigration courtroom, which means that what happens is that an immigration judge is deciding whether or not you're allowed to stay in the United States. The 3 steps is that first, there's going to be a hearing in court. Second, the team is going to prepare the case. And third, there's going to be a last hearing in court. The cancellation process, the good news about this is that the cancellation process, once you win it, you win green cards, you win legal permanent residence. And in addition to that, it has another benefit. While the case is in process, the foreign national gets a work permit. Unlike provisional waiver, where you do not get a work permit during the process, you only get a green card at the end. Cancellation does have the benefit that you get a work permit during the process, and then at the end, you get a legal permanent residency. The problem with cancellation is that it's, number one, nothing that a person can apply for directly. You have to wait until the government puts you in proceedings in front of an immigration judge. And second, you only qualify if you've lived in the United States for at least 10 years before you were placed in immigration court proceedings. So if you were entered in the United States and no one ever knew about your entry, then we might be able to file cancellation. And that's something that we would talk about as to what strategy we might use to put you in proceedings in front of a judge. But it's not something that we can directly request. It's something that we have to wait for them to put you in proceedings in front of a judge. So you're going to need the qualifying family member, at least 10 years in the United States, and a willingness to go in front of a judge. The third way is to get asylum. Now, asylum, I always say, is for those who fear significant harm if they are returned to their country. The harm must be based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or a particular social group. Asylum can take a long time, but there are significant benefits. Again, work permit while the case is in process, as well as a legal permanent residency at the end of the case. We are experts in asylum. In fact, the book that is shown on that screen is a book that we wrote about asylum, Best Tips to Win Green Cards Through Asylum. That book is available on our website. On the home screen, you can download it for free, or we can send it to you in the mail if you request it. The point is this: if you are afraid of returning to your home country, Let our attorneys decide if we can help you, because there are people who have been told by other attorneys, no, asylum is not available to you. It's not something that can be done, especially if you've been here over, a number of years. It's important to know that that's not necessarily true. We have obtained asylum for someone who entered when she was a year old, and she applied for asylum when she was 17, so that's 16 years after entering the United States, and she finally obtained asylum when she was 20. Likewise, we applied for asylum for somebody who had been in the US for 7 years, and we also won his asylum. Those were in two different parts of the country. The one for the gentleman was in New York, and the one for the woman was in Florida. Okay, but it is definitely a possibility. How long does this take? Well, if you apply voluntarily, it takes several years because there's a huge backlog right now. The process is we file the application with immigration. You'll get a work permit 7 months after filing that, so it's a big benefit. Number 3, there's an interview at immigration about 3 years after we file it. And then if you're approved, you'll get a green card 1 year after your interview. If you're not approved, what happens is your case is referred to an immigration judge. And as we spoke before, cancellation might be available to you anyway. So if you've been in the United States for over 10 years and you have US citizen children or other US citizen family members, it might be a good idea to file asylum as a way to get into immigration court, so long as your case is not what they call a frivolous case or a case with no merit. It has to have merit. Otherwise, that's going to be a reason to deny cancellation in the future. Okay? If your case is denied, your asylum case is denied, and you're referred to court, then asylum is one way that you can get residency, but you can also file cancellation. The important thing to know is that you're not limited to one process. So you can continue requesting your asylum even in court, or you can apply for cancellation if you've been here over 10 years. If you have been placed in immigration court process, then it's important to know you can file for asylum there too. Except there you would not be going to immigration interviews. You'd be going to hearings in front of a judge. Same thing applies with regards to the work permit. You'll get it 7 months after filing. And if you're approved at the last hearing, you'll get a green card 1 year after the judge's decision. So as I said, we're experts in asylum. On our website, we have many of our asylum approvals from many different years and many different cases. We handle clients from all around the United States for these cases and for all of our cases. And we have clients from over 80 different countries. The fourth way to get a work permit is something known as prosecutorial discretion. Sorry, long word to say. There's also something called 245I. I put them together because these are what I call, the rare birds. You don't usually see these cases anymore, but every now and then we do find them. And I'll explain why prosecutorial discretion and 245I are not available very often. Prosecutorial discretion is basically getting a work permit without leaving the United States. What happens is that someone who has a case in immigration court, maybe you've reopened your case or you find yourself in deportation proceedings, an attorney will basically negotiate with the prosecutor, with the attorney for immigration, and will say, look, we know you guys don't want to get rid of our client, and I know you don't want to get rid of our client. So because it's not good for our country to get rid of this client, we're going to request prosecutorial discretion, meaning you are going to agree to close the case. They're not agreeing to not deport the client. They're just saying, we agree to close the case. And while the person is in the United States with a case that is closed in immigration court, they are allowed to have a work permit. It is a way that we've negotiated for years. The only reason I say that, it's a rare bird is because in the current immigration climate, they have no reason to, everyone right now who is undocumented is a priority for removal. It's not like before where people used to say, they had strict guidelines that said, well, if they've been here over 10 years, that is not that's not a priority for removal. Right now, everybody pretty much is. But still, prosecutorial discretion is something we recommend sometimes, especially when there's evidence that it's a strong case and they might lose it anyway. So they don't want to take the risk. Immigration doesn't want to take the risk that they might lose it, and therefore they will allow us to negotiate for just the work permit. Another thing that we don't see often, but it is a way to get a work permit, is a way that we get a work permit while the case is pending, because it's important to understand, while a residency case is pending, whether it takes 6 months or 6 years for immigration to decide that case, you're allowed to have a work permit. So at the end of the process, you get a green card without leaving the United States. But during the process, you'll get a work permit. Again, the reason it's a rare bird is because it's for someone who had a labor certification, a petition, meaning a petition by a family member or a petition by a company, on or before April 31st, 2001. That was about 16 years ago. So it is rare for people to say, oh yes, I've had this petition for 16 years and I've never seen an attorney about it. But if you believe you had such a petition pending or a labor certification, or more importantly, perhaps your father or mother had such a petition or a labor certification pending, and you were alive at that time, then please talk to our attorneys about it, because this is definitely a way to become a resident, regardless of having worked without authorization, having entered without authorization. This cures a lot of sins, the 245I program. So if you think that you might be eligible for it, please go ahead and mention it to us. There's also military parole. Military parole is another way of getting a work permit immediately, and it applies for persons who are family members of someone in the military or a veteran. There are many, many veterans outside in the United States right now, and they have either spouses or stepchildren who were born in other countries and may have entered without authorization. Military parole will basically allow those stepchildren or the spouses to obtain a legal presence in the United States, and with that legal presence comes a work permit. In addition, you might be able to apply for residency now that you have that legal standing. In addition to getting the military parole based on the family member, a company could file an application to get the residency. So again, going back to that idea that residency and work permits are separate, you get your work permit based on military parole, but then you're going to need somebody to file an application to make you a resident. And this was the situation that I had, for example, for a gentleman who was married to a Mexican woman, and she had 3 children. He was a veteran from the Army, and what happened is that based on his being a veteran, we were able to get the 3 children military parole. They had all been brought to the United States when they were young, but they were not eligible for another program that exists right now for children, for people who were brought in as children. So what we did is we obtained the military parole, which also allows them to be in the United States legally, get a work permit, and then that same stepfather petitioned them to become residents. And even though it took a bit of time because they had deportation orders that we had to open, these children are now residents. So it is one step. The military parole is one step, but it is the step that will get them a work permit. How long does it take? Well, the military parole in itself, once you get that parole, it takes less than 3 months after filing the case after filing the residency case to get the work permit. The same thing for the residency. Once something known as the priority date is available, you can also get a work permit based on the residency case that's going forward. So this is definitely a very good way to get a fast work permit. But how long it'll take to actually become a resident will vary depending on which method is chosen to get residency. So the good news here is that it's a fast way to get a work permit. The bad news is it might take many years to become a resident, but that's okay because you'll be here lawfully in the United States while that process goes on. So the next steps, depending on what kind of case it is to gather documents and call our office for our consultation if you believe that any of these types of cases may apply to you. The reason that we want you to gather the documents before you call our office is so that you have an idea as to what you're going to be discussing with our attorneys when you call. For example, family cases, you'll need proof of relationship and proof of citizenship or residency of your family member. If you're going to consider an employment-based case, you're going to need a summary of your work experience with exact dates. We can't have you just coming here to our consultations and speaking with and say, oh, I have over 10 years. We need to actually see what exact dates you worked at each place, especially if those places were not your own business. If you worked for over 10 years, but only at your own business and you didn't have any other employee who can vouch for you, that's going to be very difficult to demonstrate that that is actual experience. If someone's going to petition for you, in addition, we're going to need that employer to be available on a call so we can discuss the case and make sure that we're all on the same page as to them applying for you. For court cases, if you have a court case now or you're considering something like cancellation, we're going to need to see any documents that immigration mailed to you and any applications you might have sent to immigration. It's going to make a big difference in how well we can represent you if we can see the history you've had with immigration. And for asylum, we're going to need proof of the date of your last entry because, as I mentioned, asylum has to be applied for within 1 year of your last entry date. So it's been a pleasure speaking with you all. Our phone number is listed here. Like I said, please gather your documents and call our office if you think we can be of any help. Have a good day.